Welcome everyone. Today we have an amazing Falconer guide. So looking behind me, we're learning this particular build from Juse over here, and let's have a look at the demonstration of the replay at over 760 corruption. So a lot of my viewers were sharing me about different builds, and this one really caught my attention. And I really want to give our content creator Juse the credits and also the recommendation he deserves. So looking at the gameplay over here, you can see our Falconer friend is a marksman. No, I'm joking. So remember our marksman that throws explosive traps? This is also a similar concept that he will be throwing explosive traps. And this is basically saying, Mom, we have marksman at home with marksman. And we have Marksman at home with Falconer. So you can see right away, the damage numbers are pretty nice AoE, and the explosion are not cold damage. So unlike the Marksman that deals lightning damage with detonating arrows, here Juse is doing cold damage using Acid Flask. So coming over to this echo as I explain the build. We can see that he's constantly spamming his explosive trap just like the Marksman, but this will be auto-casting Acid Flask. With his Falconer abilities and also Swift, it is very similar to how we were playing with the Marksman, but the auto-cast ability will be Acid Flask. The Falconery and also other skills will interact correctly to allow him to cast even more Acid Flask. And this particular build is also pretty mobile with Swift and also ability to be auto-casting shurikens. So you can see with over 760 corruption here, our friend doesn't have a problem, and I do believe he has pushed over to 800 corruption. So the next thing is, let's have a look at this build against bosses. So coming over to one of Juse's latest video with a demonstration of 842 corruption boss, and this is going to be a shade. So having a look at the build, you can see that this build has a lot of freeze rate, up to close to 2000% freeze rate, and this will allow him to immobile the enemies more consistently. And right away you can see, the build deals consistent damage and the damage will rack up, and also his survivability will rack up as he deals more damage, which I explained in the idols. The damage numbers is not going to be the best boss slayer, but it is very consistent. And together with the ability to constantly be freezing enemies, this build can be quite safe as it frees enemies and also bosses. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be the best boss lane build, but it is a new tech of a build, and it is also using Acid Flask. And also this is very similar to the Marksman concept that we're using. And over here you can see it took him about 20 to 30 seconds to take down the 800 corruption boss. I do believe the build can take you up to 1000 corruption. And one of the biggest highlights for the build is he's using items that most other builds don't normally use. And this can be a potential for you to try a different setup if you like the Marksman, and also enjoy different concept with the build, and also using different items which could be cheaper. Now before we jump over to the builder's guide, a big thank you for Juse for sharing this one, and some of my viewers have shared this build with me. Now if you haven't seen his videos, Juse does have a YouTube channel that will be focusing on this particular build. I do recommend coming over here and also learning the build and also combination with him. Together he will be answering a lot of questions in the comments, so if you have any questions, any ideas and any suggestions, let him know in the comments, and he's really helpful and really nice with the response. Now Juse has provided us with 3 different setups of the build, so I'll briefly go through them. The first setup is a very simple setup if you want to get your hands on the build and try it out. It will take one particular unique idol, but this is not a big deal. The second build is what he's currently using. Currently he's using more items that is crafted into legendaries. And because most of items will come with 2 or 3 legendary potential, it is quite easy to get your hands on the build even in the final version. Juse has also crafted a potential theory crafting warding setup that can be a little more costly. So he hasn't tested this one yet, but the second build is working perfectly with over 800 corruption. So if we come over to the endgame build for this Acid Flask Falconer code setup, one of the first things you can notice is in terms of offense, I think our friend has close to 2000 freeze rate multipliers. And this is amazing, we can be freezing a lot. He will be stacking a lot of cold resistance because he will be going for these gloves. Now do keep in mind guys, this is a theoretical craft. You're not expected to have over 1 LP on those gloves. He just added those because those are the good stats that he's looking for. And this of course will give him tons of ward retention, which allows him to transition into the future build. Now in order to understand how this build works, let's briefly come over to the skills. If you come over to the skills, you're going to see a lot of similarities to our Marksman build, which will be auto-casting the detonating arrow. Try to not confuse you guys too much, but if you have played the Marksman build, you should be understanding this build quite easily. So first of all, our activating spell is going to be Explosive Trap. He'll be turning Explosive Trap into cold, and while dealing more cold damage with more freeze rate. So he's not auto-casting Detonating Arrow, of course. And over here he goes with all the good perks that auto-cast more Explosive Traps. And the final point over here allows him to be casting SF Flask automatically using his Explosive Trap. So this together with his ability with Trap Sprinkler and also with lower mana cost, he will be casting more Asset Flask. And the ability of focus will be Asset Flask. Asset Flask over here will be doing more poison damage initially, and the multipliers are not bad. But as you're gonna see with the items, this particular catalyst will turn the Asset Flask poison damage into cold damage, and all the poison chance into force by chance. Together with the ability to force bite on hit and also lots of freeze multipliers, lots of cold damage, this is going to be the core piece of the build. Now it's quite similar to our previous build with Swift. He will be auto-casting shurikens, and here he will inform ability. You can consider going with more dodge as well by stacking dexterity. And here in terms of shuriken, he'll be going with increased armor as his shurikens are auto-casted with Swift. He can also manually cast those. And I also noticed that he's getting additional haste as he have shuriken. So this is actually not bad in terms of a bonus speed mobility skill combined with Swift. Now finally, in terms of the falconry, he is gaining additional ways of Falcon's Mark. Together with the ability to be auto-casting more Asset Flask with his falcons and also getting more charges, this build will have multiple ways to be auto-casting Asset Flask, which will scale with damage over time, elemental damage, cold freeze multipliers, cold damage, and even chance to poison. So there's multiple ways to scale this build, and this allows him to deal a lot of damage in terms of cold damage. Now briefly going through the passives. The Rogue tree and also the Blade Dancer tree are pretty straightforward. He'll be getting some beneficial points while focusing more on the falconry. Now while staying mobile, he will have tons of damage reduction. And over here he does have some defensive perks while having additional damage and also additional damage when enemies are slowed. Because cold setup build will have so many ways of slowing enemies, this is actually really good. So now coming back to the items, you can see that he's using a variety of legendary items crafted from unique items which are quite cheap to get. So you're expected to get your hands on 2 legendary potential or 3 legendary potential on those gears. As for the chest, throwing an Asset Flask will consume a potion to deal more damage with Asset Flask. Together with increased damage over time implicit, he can even get +4 ranks to Asset Flask. And the throwing attack speed will scale towards his build. So this means the faster he throws, the more Asset Flask he will auto-cast. Now in terms of the helmet, it is another cheaper helmet with slow blind. So here you can see that he has a lot of craftings on those, but ideally having 3 affixes crafted is not bad. This helmet gives him a lot of freeze rate, and if you remember previously, showcased over here, he will be stacking freeze rate over 2000% closely. And in terms of the weapon, again, it's a freeze rate implicit weapon that also deals more cold damage, additional freeze rate, and also additional chance of dealing more cold damage. Now the crafting for this weapon currently, it is tier 7 damage over time. You can go with other multipliers as well because the build is actually quite flexible. If you had a look over here, he was going with tier 7 elemental damage previously. Now coming over to the amulet, he'll be gaining additional throw attack speed and also ways to leech life. So this Bleeding Heart amulet again is one of the not, the meta amulet and shouldn't be too expensive. In terms of the belt, he tried to use Viper Tail, and I do believe this particular belt will give him ways of slowing enemies, poison on hit which will be converted into cold aspects over here with the catalyst, and also additional dodge rating. Together with abilities to get a legendary 3 potential on the belt, it is not bad of a choice. Now as for the rings, he's going with throw damage mana cost. This is very important to notice, and some of the viewers on his videos were not sure why he was using this particular ring. I do think it's possible that he was getting additional legendary potentials on the ring and also having a lot of cold resistance, void resistance, and also health on the ring. The implicit is not great, but having tier 7 throwing attack is very important to have the lower mana cost. So notice both rings are crafted tier 7 throwing mana cost reduction. Now for the case you don't have those legendary rings, you can go with Exalted rings with tier 7 throwing mana cost. And together with throwing attack speed, it is very important to have those onto the rings. Now if you guys know a Marksman build, he will be using a similar relic. So this relic will increase your cold and also your lightning damage when you match your intelligence and also attunement by shooting out more orbs of water. And this will also be giving him additional cold damage together with more resistance. Now in terms of the boots, he's going with Snowdrift. This will provide him additional ways of getting Frostbite and together with increased Frostbite freeze rate multipliers. And finally, we talk about the gloves. Those gloves are quite rare, so you're expected to get a Legendary 1 and Legendary 2 will be extremely rare. So don't have to follow him when you see all the crafted Legendary potentials, that's all 4. And those are just the theoretical craft that you can be getting onto those items. Now in terms of blessing, something interesting is over here. He'll be using the Throne of Ambition. Now this particular idol is a unique idol that provides you with additional cold damage together with bonus armor. So this will help him to become tankier while gaining more cold damage. Other than that, you can see that he is increasing chance to poison on hit, which will be converted into the cold aspects. And here he will go with some resistance that he's missing, and also additional dodge rate for more survivability. In terms of the blessings, he's going with Life Leech with throwing attack. This combined with Amulet allows him to have more Life Leech. Over here you can see additional chance to poison on hit, which will be converted by the Catalyst, together with additional armor and also chance of Frostbite on hit, and finally additional freeze rate multipliers. So this particular build will be focused on freezing enemies and keeping yourself alive while they're frozen. Now in terms of loot filter, Juse has provided his own personal loot filter. And if you guys are interested, I can try to incorporate the loot filter into our multi-loot filter. So let me know in the comments below, guys, if you want to have this loot filter together with a multi-filter with Warlock, Marksman, and also Falconer. So coming back to Juse's gameplay, briefly talking about the skill rotations. It is very straightforward, and if you play the Lightning Marksman, it's almost the same. This is a cold Falconer using the explosive trap. You're basically spamming your traps and you're basically moving through the map with Swift. You'll be auto-casting a lot of your spells, and most of the time you don't have to be cast Falconery because you're only saving this one for the boss, right? So yes, you'll be doing tons of damage and also freezing enemies in the track. This means you have more survivability. Now, as you deal more damage to the monsters, the damage will rack up, and because you have so many multipliers, so many ways of freezing enemies, this build is extremely fun while you have a lot of cold damage across the stream. Now in terms of the boss fight, you do want to keep yourself mobile, and it is quite important because you can see that his current health is not going to be the highest. So this is one of the drawbacks for the build, because as you go beyond 1000 corruption, you may be one-shotted. But at the moment you can see that he can still survive and tank up with 800 corruption. So I definitely believe this build can push to 1000 corruption. And hopefully Juse can update the build to showcase us with 1000 or maybe beyond 1000 corruption with this particular setup. Now if you guys do have any questions or if you want to follow the build, I definitely recommend coming over to Juse's channel, ask him any questions, and also be learning the build as he updates with more tips to this particular setup. Now if you guys haven't subscribed, this is a really good time to do so, because I'll be learning with tons of the top meta, last Epoch build from different players in terms of solo and also in terms of co-op, to push for higher corruptions, 800, 2000 here, and also different ways of getting top leaderboard with arena with leveling. And in doing so, we'll be learning multiple builds from the best players in the world. So make sure you subscribe and join me on this adventure to learn with Last Epoch. And if you guys do have an amazing build, whether it's a fun build, it's a creative build, or maybe a top meta build, you can share with me on Discord, and I'll look into it, learn the build, and share with everyone on the Last Epoch community.